Hi, neighbor. My name is Bob Lingle from Good Neighbor Bookstore in Lakewood, New York, and you're listening to the Pre-Order Podcast, where we do a deep dive into the books we're looking forward to getting into your hands later this year. Our guest today is Hannah Pittard. She is the author of 6 books, including the memoir We Are Too Many and the forthcoming novel If You Love It, Let It Kill You. She is a winner of the Amanda Davis Highwire Fiction Award, a McDowell Fellow, and the Guy M. Davenport Professor in English at the University of Kentucky. She lives with her boyfriend and stepdaughter in Lexington, and she just happens to be one of my favorite writers. So we got connected because of, is it Carolyn, the senior editor at Henry Holtz. I don't remember how Carolyn and I got connected, but I've become one of her people that she just sends manuscripts to. And she said, "Hey, I have one for you that I think you're gonna really enjoy." And I think she told me that it was The Militia House. And I got a copy of We Are Too Many in the mail. I'm like, this is not The Militia House. And I read the description. I'm like, it sounds interesting. And then I've told you this, but I read the beginning portion where you quote Marv Levy. And growing up down the street from the Buffalo Bills Stadium, I'm like, well, now I have to read this. And just fell in love with the story and the way you, in a very original way, told the story. It is a memoir, kind of. And the one question that I had that I don't think I ever asked through our Instagram messages, how did you settle on the Marv Levy quote?
Man, I love that quote. And honestly, my boyfriend who, I seem to cut out for a second. That I've turned off my notifications, but
Okay.
That's on my side, right? Hold on.
I think so. I'm not seeing any messages pop up.
Okay,
There was one interview from a few years ago that my brother and sister decided to start having a group text, and I did not turn off notifications.
Okay, and I have siblings, so I know what that is like when they get started, and honestly, I think this is them, so let me just quit messages and hope that turns it off, and I'm turning off my phone as well, so that should shut people up. Okay, cool. So my boyfriend, which is such a funny word to say for a person that I own a house with, and I'm in a committed long-term forever, we're going to die together relationship, but I just refuse to get married again. But he quoted this at me once many years ago: if you don't change with the times are going to change you. And I hated it. I just hated it. And then I found myself saying it. I would say it to my students. I would say it to my friends, to my family. And I realized it was kind of just a perfect quote for the memoir. Like, you're divorced. You're either going to get on board with being divorced or you're not going to be on board. And then I love that I used it, and it was the thing that connected us. And it honestly, it also connected me with Ed Park, who's a writer who I've admired forever. But it got his attention as well because he also loves the other quote that was in there. So yeah, it was one of these quotes that originally it was just like this mosquito in my ear, and I hated it, and I couldn't get rid of it, and now I love it. I just think it encapsulates so much.
Another Marv Levy quote is, "Where else would you rather be than right here, right now?" Which is usually said after the fact, sarcastically, when it's just 0 degrees outside with negative 20-degree wind chill.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
We have this thing that we do here in Kentucky. It can get very, very hot here in the way that it gets really cold where you are. And I'm a distance runner. And I picked this up during COVID from a couple of these old guys that walk all the time. They used to be runners, but now they walk to protect their, hips and their knees. And one of them said to me once, and I loved it. It was like 99 degrees outside. I'm sweating. They're sweating. And I ran by them. And this guy said, "It's almost hot." And I was like, that's a keeper, man.
It's almost hot.
Now we say it to each other all the time. I'm like, "It's almost hot." And he's always like, "You're saying it too early. You got to wait till July when you say it." Okay.
Yeah.
I'll get it right next year.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So for We Are Too Many, obviously we're talking about your other book, but we can't talk about your next book without talking about We Are Too Many. If you wanted to just kind of give a background on the book and what inspired it, where it came from.
Okay, and by book here, you want me to do the new book or the memoir?
The memoir
Okay.
first.
So the memoir book. The memoir book was my ex-husband, when he was still my husband, had an affair with my very dear friend, the woman who introduced me to him. And their affair sort of launched at the same time that my third book was launching, and things happened really quickly. The best thing that they did was admit the affair the minute I found out. They didn't lie. So we were all able to kind of rapidly move forward with our lives. I got a divorce very quickly. In Kentucky, it's difficult to get a divorce quickly, especially if you have children, but we didn't have children. So we
Mhm.
moved faster, I was told by my divorce attorney, than any divorce she's ever seen move. And that also meant that part of that speed meant that a lot of my figuring out what had happened after the fact. I just got through it. And then in those months afterwards was when I was thinking about it and how did we get here? And how did I get to be single, having been married to what I thought was the love of my life? And I'd been with him for 10 years. Um, and it was actually, this book came out of two things. One was an essay that I ended up writing about the experience, the divorce and the affair, for the Swanee Review. I never thought I was going to be a nonfiction writer. I've always been a novelist, but Adam Ross had just taken over the Swanee Review. He had just read the book, the third book that had come out. He got in touch with me, and originally he was going to have me write a story for him, and then he ended up talking to me on the phone, and it was like 2 days after I'd found out about the affair, and the same day I'd seen the lawyer. And by the end of this epic phone call, he said, "I don't want a story, I want an essay." So he worked on this essay with me for about 7 months, and I thought I was done with it. I'd written the essay, I felt good about it. Adam accidentally became a kind of therapist for me for about 7 months, and on the other side of it, I tried to start writing fiction again, and I did write fiction. I wrote a whole novel that never sold, and that was right before COVID. And then COVID hit. This novel I'd written had gone out to editors. No one picked it up. And I was in a funk. I was in a total funk. And then COVID made me even funkier. And
Mhm.
all of these conversations that I thought I had dealt with, all the stuff that didn't make it into that essay that I wrote for Swanee Review. I'm up in an attic right now, and I had just moved in with my boyfriend, and he has a child, and it was the first time we were all living together, and the shutdown occurred within 2 months of buying the house. And I thought I was kind of losing my mind, and my outlet has always been writing. And I would come up here to the attic, and I would try to write, and instead I was just inundated by these conversations from a decade earlier. And I started writing them down. I thought if I write them down, then I can clear my brain and I can move forward to something else. And I just kept writing and writing and writing. And at first, I did not think that this was something that was going to be shared. And then there's enough of you on the page, and there's enough of you sort of like bleeding and emoting. And I think at a certain point, I thought, well, what am I doing this for now? Um, Maybe there's a connection to make with the world in a moment when I'm feeling very unconnected from the world. And I sent it to my agent, and she said, all I know is I want to keep reading. So I kept writing, and I accidentally wrote a memoir. And it makes sense to me that it it did come out as nonfiction, because I've always been able to turn my life into fiction. I've always been able to use my life for fodder. But this experience was so close to me that the few times that I did sit down to try to write it as a novel, it just, there were no stakes. I didn't care. When I was thinking
Mhm.
about me as a fictional character, having experienced this betrayal, it just felt so unimportant. But when it was me, as me, the writer, it felt so much more significant to me. And typically I'm a pretty private person. And there was just something about the weird alchemy of COVID, being so alone, feeling so disconnected, that I wanted to put myself on display, and I did. And that's how the memoir came to be. So it's very much about the dissolution of a marriage, and then a writer trying to figure out how she got where she got, like how she let things get so bad for so long, and then the recovery on the other side of it.
I thank you for that explanation. Um, After reading We Are Too Many and then your upcoming book, If You Love It, Let It Kill You, and then the source material for If You Love It, Let It Kill You, which is your ex's novel, which is a novel about a man who cheats on his more successful author wife with their best friend, which if this sounds like if you feel like you're getting deja vu listening to this, um, I did end up going back and reading that, and I have dubbed this whole thing the Hannah Pittard multiverse, which the with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think that this is going to be a huge book for you. I have talked about it at least once a week with different people and on our social media pages. So why don't we talk about If You Love It, Let It Kill You? If you wanted to kind of give a brief synopsis of the inspiration and where this came from.
I can be shorter. I do think I can be shorter with this. Yes. So my ex-husband was a writer, a struggling writer, and definitely one of the tensions before the infidelity was I was getting published and he was not. And that is a tension, I think, for anybody who's in the same field. But I think especially artistically, that can hurt. And it certainly hurt him, and it hurt me because I was less excited about any of my successes. And so we were each, I think, feeling very isolated and sort of angry by the end of our marriage. He didn't stop writing when we got a divorce, and because writers don't stop writing. And in 2022, about the same time that we were about to announce on Publishers Marketplace, that lunch thing where people announce books, Publishers Lunch, we were about to announce my memoir, and I got an email from my agent, and she said, "Have you seen this?" And I hadn't seen it, and it was an announcement for my ex-husband's debut novel, and the synopsis was our marriage and the end of our marriage and his affair. And this blew my mind. And I know this is hard to believe, but I was happy for him. I was happy for him because anybody who has wanted to be a writer and finally gets that book deal, it's such a relief. You can have everything still wrong in your life, but it's such a relief. You feel vindicated, and like the thing that you've been wanting and struggling for most of your life, you finally get it. So I was actually happy for him. That is real. But I was also like kind of driven crazy by it because I could not find anything out about it. I had not Googled him in like 6 years. But of course, I sat down to Google him immediately because I needed to know everything there was to
Mhm.
know about this debut. And I couldn't find anything, but I did find a story that he had published about 3 years earlier about a man who has an affair with his best friend's wife. But in the short story version, and everything about the wife lines up with me, like her tenure track, the book she's written, the dude she's with now, the fact that there's a stepdaughter, it all lines up, right? So I'm seeing myself in this short story. And by the way, the short story was very compelling. It was like my favorite thing he's ever written. But he kills me in the story. Not him, but he has a homeless guy knife me to death. And I was not expecting this. I'm online sleuthing, trying to find out stuff about his novel. And instead I found out that I'd been murdered in a story that he'd written and published several years earlier. And I started like using this as a one-liner with my friends. I'm really good friends with the poet Ada Limon, and I called her and I said, Ada, I've been walking around murdered for 3 years. And we both laughed. And then she said, that's not funny. I don't like this at all. And I was like, well, I think it's really funny. And I sat down and I started writing this book about a kind of mid-list novelist who thinks she's very happy, very content. She's post-divorce. She's raising a stepdaughter. And then she finds out that her husband is writing a book about her and has also murdered her in a piece of fiction. And her life kind of spirals out of control. And so it begins with his book, but it very much becomes, I think, pretty quickly about a lot of other things, but certainly appropriation and art and whose story is whose to tell is definitely at the heart of it.
There's not going to be a question here that I can think of, but what I have really enjoyed with your writing is over the last couple of years, I've really gotten into, and I hate the name of the category of women's fiction, but I've just fallen down this rabbit hole of like Catherine Newman, Alison Espak, and just a number of others. The Book of George is one that sticks out in my mind, and the author's name is not sticking to my mind. But I just really enjoy the way female authors can tell a story and put the emotion behind it. It has ruined me for a lot of male authors that I have enjoyed, of especially their depiction of women. I'm like, that doesn't seem right to me. The depiction of men in a lot of the books, the only thing that I don't like about it is like I see my worst characteristics in especially the Book of George. And there is a book that I'm reading now that comes out later this year called The 10-Year Affair, and the husband that's in the book that's not having an affair. I'm like, I just see so much of myself in those characters. What I like about yours and what I appreciate is that I don't identify with the male characters. For some reason, I always identify with your female male characters. I don't know what that says about me, but I just wanted to put that out into the world. The
No, I
awkward,
love that. I love that. And I
yeah.
have to say, I have fallen down. I grew up reading men's literature by men. It's
Mhm.
what I was inundated with. It's what I thought I enjoyed. I definitely do enjoy it. And it really wasn't until post-divorce that I started reading people like Deborah Levy, the people you've mentioned. And I just absolutely, I think it's, there's such nuance and also humility and also humor. And there's a lot of anger, but I think it's with a sense of joy. I don't know. I really like it, and that makes me very happy. I have to tell you, when I did the book launch for the memoir, there were several men in the audience who had recently gone through divorces,
Mhm.
and two of them came up to me separately to say, I know that people are saying this is a book for women and it's by a woman and it's about women. And he said, these two guys separately, they said, listening to you read from it tonight, I have a sense of what really went wrong in my marriage. And they were like, this is a book for all people. And I loved that. Because I try really hard in the memoir to, as much as I think I am skewering them, I really try to shine a pretty ugly light on myself as well. I think I was very difficult to be in a relationship, and I try to make that clear that I am not a saint. And just because I didn't have an affair does not mean I don't have fleas and smell bad. I have plenty of fleas and smell plenty bad.
With the distance running, I'm sure
Yeah,
that
yeah, for
contributes.
sure. Yeah, and I don't always shower immediately after a run, which does drive my boyfriend crazy. He's like, it's just right upstairs. It's just that the
Yeah.
bathroom's right there.
I well, on the topic of distance running, I am frustrated. For the last 2 years, I've been dealing with plantar fasciitis, which just has not been
Mm,
going away.
mm,
The next doctor appointment that I have, I've discussed the getting the steroid shot into my foot, which apparently is very painful. but I'm getting tired of not being able to run. But I am an extremely sweaty individual. So a lot of times I will just wait for a while after a run because I know that if I shower right after the run, I'm still just going to be sweating for a while after.
You might as well just, like, milk it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. No, get the shots. I haven't had the shots, but my mom gets shots in her feet, like, once a month, and
Mhm,
the pain that of the needle is nothing compared to the pain of the plantar fasciitis.
mhm. It's I wear I turned 40 a few months ago, and I just feel like I immediately like, all right, this is the inserts in the shoes so I can walk and be comfortable.
Did you see
Just
that thing
settling in.
about, like, there are the 2 big age gap the places where we age the most, the age pops, it's at 44 and 60, that's when your body just, like, starts breaking down?
Okay, so I still have a few years
Yeah,
before.
you're really not actually aging yet.
Great.
4 years. 4 years you're really gonna know. Yeah.
Okay, so I will enjoy the next 4
Yes,
years.
please do.
Okay. Um, I, um, had talked with, another author that I had become friends with, and we became friends because of TikTok, Jared Krasoska. Um, we became friends because we just incessantly made fun of each other on social media and then, met, and I'm still pretty sure that he got me sick at Winter Institute, but
Uh,
it's still up for debate. But he wrote "Hey Kiddo," which is a memoir about his childhood, and I've tried to write personal things, and his advice was it's easier to write about people after they're dead. Um, most, if not all, of the people that you wrote about in "We Are Too Many" and alluded to in "If You Love It, Let It Kill You" are very much still alive. What is that struggle like to write and put something out in the world that's not just your story?
with the memoir, it helped that for a long time while I was writing it, I didn't think of it as being actually out in the world.
Mhm,
That helped a great deal. And then when it became clear that it was gonna be something out in the world, um, well, legal got involved pretty quickly, and we just made a decision to change the names and to change some key details to allow people who wanted to be, um, anonymous to stay anonymous if that's what they chose to do.
mhm,
So and I also thought with regards to the memoir, there were some stories that in an early draft I included that were not my stories to tell, and it was very much, I think, about unburdening, um, my sense of having been wronged or something, and I just there was, like, a little bit of a in the first draft of a kind of, like, tell all, like, here's all the ugly stuff, and going through and removing sort of like the cobwebs of that's her story that has nothing to do with this particular betrayal. In doing that, you start to see, well, they made their decisions about what they wanted out of their life, and I made my decisions, and the ones that pertain to me, I tried really hard to limit it to what do I need in order to tell this story honestly, and everything I don't need, then that's not gonna stay on the page. And I think that somebody who's read the memoir and is listening to this might say, "So you needed to include this, um, hypothetical, like, the night that they may or may not have hooked up and how it, for the first time and what it looked like?" And I would say, "Absolutely," because I'm trying to tell you my story, and my story involves a very neurotic brain and needing to understand the origins of things. And so one of the things post-divorce that I was obsessed with was trying to figure out and like replaying in my mind something I could never have access to. How did the affair begin? And so that's why that hypothetical, um, origin story is there, which I very much say this didn't happen, but here's how it might have happened,
mhm,
because I'm trying to let the reader into my brain. I'm not trying at all to, in that moment, to say anything about them. I'm trying to say something about me. With regards to the new book, which has a lot of stuff in it that's fiction, like just 100% is fiction. Like cats can't talk, number one. Um, although like I do talk to animals all the time, and I
Mhm.
even like there are pauses to allow them to say the things that I can hear them saying. Um, so the new book is fiction, but I am very much, yes, borrowing some identities from my family, specifically my family, the people who are still in my life. I am using them and distorting them. And, my sister and my brother many, many years ago just said, we don't care. Like, we trust you, go for it. Um, and then with my mother, who I'm exceedingly close to, um, my mother has read each of the sections her sort of hypothetical character is in,
Mhm.
and she's given me permission. Um, and then, beyond that, it's just, uh, I guess there's a part of me that feels like obviously with my boyfriend and, I made sure that he was 100% okay with every single thing that I wrote,
Mhm.
and he was, and so the people that I really truly care about and worry about, um, I got their permission, and then I tried not to incorporate anybody beyond that, and, I even asked my sister, "Do you need to read it?" And she was like, "No, I'll read it when, you get a copy, like, send it to me then," because she's busy and has a life,
Yeah.
and she's also read everything that I've ever written, and I think I've I've established, a trust with her over 20, 25 years of writing sort of about myself and cannibalizing my own life. But it's, the closer we get, it's certainly easier a year and a half out when you finish the book and you've sold it. But now that we're like 3.5 months away, there's a part of me that wonders, I wonder what my mother is going to think about this completely fictionalized version of herself. It's not her, um, but, I'm sort of imagining her doing these things that she's never done,
Mhm.
um, and I wonder how she'll feel about it when she sees it all in the same place, and certainly I wonder that about my sister who gives me permission to do, anything. I wonder how she'll feel about it, but, like, readers always love all the versions of my sister and my mother that I've ever put in anything, whether it's the memoir or my novels, people love those characters the most. So I think that my love for them comes through. I hope it does. I hope everyone's still talking to me, Bob. I have no idea. We'll find out. Well, like, let's do this again July 16th and see, like, if I have friends anymore.
Yeah. It'll be good to get that recap. That's something that and we've messaged about this, but I just the family drama that everybody has, that I've tried to tackle and just kind of work through writing. Um, you had mentioned, was it who is Adam to you? The agent that you had referenced as he was kind of your unofficial therapist.
Oh, Adam Ross. Yeah, Adam
Yeah.
Ross.
Um,
Yeah, the Swanee Review editor.
yeah. Oh, he I had used COVID and did a lot of virtual author events, and a lot of the authors that I talked to, it was just like, all right, this is just a therapy session for me to get in, do deep dives into topics. We had Andrew Katz, who has a new book that just came out, but it was Vampire Gideon's Suicide Hotline and Halfway House for Wayward Girls, and it was a book that he wrote dealing with his depression, which I also struggle with. We had interviewed Jeff Danziger, who's a political cartoonist, about his memoir Lieutenant Dangerous, and it was about his time in Vietnam. My dad had served in Vietnam, and that just kind of overshadowed his life. So I am all about the unofficial therapist, and using books and writing to process things.
100%.
I have not gotten to the point of putting it out into the world, but maybe we'll get there at some point.
No, like I came to autobiographical fiction late. I came to it because in my ex-husband's debut, the synopsis that in the announcement, it said that the soon-to-be ex-wife wasn't about to publish a memoir, but about to publish autofiction. And I had no idea what it was. And I started doing this deep dive into autofiction. And now I teach it. I've done so much research on it. And my students, I'm teaching 2 different autofiction classes right now, one beginner, one intermediate. And a lot of my students are writing, especially now that they're on their 3rd and 4th pieces. I think it takes them a minute because they're all kind of like, putting their feet in kind of slowly to see what everyone is going to write about and how honest or vulnerable they're going to be. But we're towards the end of the semester and people are getting pretty vulnerable. And we had workshop yesterday and several young people had written about their parents. And when they had an opportunity to talk after workshop, they were like, yeah, my mom typically reads everything I've ever written, but she's not reading this.
Yeah.
And the classmates were like, she should not read this.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's right. But also, she doesn't have to read everything you write. Y'all are adults now. So
Mhm.
you don't have to share it. But I say that with the caveat of like, I share it, but you don't have to. Like maybe you take the next 10 years and you get it out of your system and then see where you are.
With how personal you've been, even with the fictionalized versions of yourself, um, have you ever felt awkward being a professor and having students read your books and getting that insight into, even if it's a fictionalized account of your life, just having that personal look inside you?
Okay, so I have to tell you, the majority of my students seem very surprised when one of my other students will mention that I've written a book. So a lot of them, the majority of them have not read any of
Mhm.
these books. They don't even know they exist. I have a couple students that have read the memoir, and that is, there's sex. And so
Mhm.
that's wild to me. I write a lot about my eating disorder, which I like to write about and I like to shine a light on it and to talk about it. So that I'm actually really excited about when young people read it because I think there's such a stigma about eating disorders and there's so much shame still and it's such a secretive, isolating, horrible, alone feeling disease. So that part I don't mind at all. The sex is weird. And I have a lot
Mhm.
of neighbors. I'm involved in a kind of grassroots neighborhood thing right now where we're up against some desire to pave over some of our green spaces. And I've recently made a lot of friends with some of the older people in my neighborhood, and they've all started buying my books. And they've gone from the debut to the memoir. And now that they're on the
Mhm.
memoir, I see them kind of looking at me and my boyfriend. They're like, "Oh, so you guys have sex twice a week. Okay." I'm like, "And that great. So we just said that in front of people. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, well, it's in the book, so I mean, fair
Yeah.
game." Um, but, with the novel that's coming out, I'm really curious to see what some of the feedback will be because, last summer, there was a very long profile that was published in New York Magazine by a very thoughtful, considerate writer who spent 3 days with me in Lexington, spent 3 days with my ex-husband in Charlottesville, and wrote like 13,000 words. And that felt very much like I was not in control of my story, which drove me a little bit crazy, but it's
Mhm.
part of what happens when you're being profiled. But one of the interesting conversations that we had when I was driving him to the airport on the final day, I had just given him a manuscript of If You Love It, Let It Kill You. And he'd read it the night before and he said, "So do you want to talk about this?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. If you want to tell me what you think." And he said, "Well, I couldn't put it down." And I said, "Well, that's great. Like that's what
Mhm.
every writer wants to hear." And he said, "I'm nervous for you." And I said, "Well, what are you nervous about?" And he said he thinks that people will conflate what's real and what's not real. Like, he thinks that a lot of people are gonna read the family stuff, and they're gonna say, "This is too crazy. Like, this is the fiction," and that they'll read you know, there's some darkness in the book, and the book
Mhm.
needs the darkness. There's, infidelity and the possibility of sexual assault, and, he said, "I think that that's what people are gonna think are fiction, um, or they're going to think that that's what's real. They're going to think the assault and the infidelity on your side is what's real. And they're going to think this other zany stuff isn't real. And I said, well, part of what I'm doing is a performance, right? Especially when authors write works of fiction, especially since like in the day and age of social media, we're asked to like also promote ourselves and to make our identity part of the sales process. And so I'm interested in like playing around with those expectations. But then what I was telling him as I was driving him to the airport, I was like, the thing is, the sexual assault that may or may not have happened because the novelist, the writer, the narrator can't remember something. And it's like the thing that she just can never get back. That happened to me. It just happened to me when I was in graduate school, and it happened to me in a completely different context. And it's one of those things that I still think about because I still have no idea what happened. And I really, and I've been trying to write about it for years, and it showed up in a book that didn't get published, that book from before COVID. It just never got picked up, but I couldn't get over this experience and I wanted to put it on the page, and I did. And I think at the end of the day, I guess you just have to be comfortable that there are things that are out of your control. And if you're going to write about yourself or perform writing about yourself, then that's just one of the things that comes along with it, this sort of acquiescing control. We don't get, and it's what I tell my students all the time, but it's also really hard to take home with you, a writer, separately. But you know, the reason that I don't let my students talk during a workshop is because when we take each other's pieces home with us, there's not like a version of, the writer sitting on your shoulder saying, that's not what I meant. You're reading it wrong. It's just us and the text. And so all this to say, I think it's also really good for somebody like me who I have a lot of OCD. I have a lot of control issues. I think one reason that I got so invested in an eating disorder early on was this great desire for control. And so doing things like this, like the memoir, exposing myself, and then performing exposing myself with this next book, I think it's really good for me to have to just say, I don't get to say what happens. I cannot say whether or not this book does well. I cannot say whether or not people will like it. And I cannot control what people will think about me on the other side. All I can control are my own behaviors and whether or not, I'm enjoying the life that I'm living, and whether or not I'm being an active participant sort of in the day-to-day like process of life. Like these are the things I can control, and I don't have to expose myself, but I enjoy it. So I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know.
I appreciate that take, especially like where I'm at in my life now of 3 months into a new job where I have coworkers for the first time in a decade, and the store that I have had complete control over for the last 7 years, my wife is now running and implementing her own things, which um, just a side note that my wife and I met working at Barnes and Noble together. And when we made the announcement that we were going to be doing this little career swap with each other, our old store manager who runs the Barnes and Noble Instagram page commented, Shannon was a better bookseller anyways. And I'm like, I was the digital salesperson, so I sold the Nook to people. So yes, she was a better bookseller, but now 3 months in, I'm like, oh no, yeah, no, she actually is a better bookseller than I am.
Well, that's great though. That's
Yeah.
great. But yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be immediate responses for me is always like defensive. Like
Hmm.
what you just said. Well, I was digital, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I do that all
I
the
mean,
time.
that was my immediate response to.
I love it. I love it. I like the honesty and vulnerability of that.
And on the note of just like the performative nature of like who we become through social media, that has been something that has been a balance with the store, especially when I purchased the store 7 years ago, I had purchased the name of Off the Beaten Path Bookstore, which I didn't have a connection to. I didn't really like the name. Sorry to my friends at Off the Beaten Path bookstore in Colorado who happen to have the same name. But I just didn't have an attachment to it. And then when I rebranded to Good Neighbor Bookstore and like had Mr. Rogers as a big influence for the store, I who do I have to be now? And like, what can I do? And I'm like, I balanced it with I have a portrait of Mr. Rogers and I have a portrait of Kurt Vonnegut in the store. And I'm
Love it.
like, these are my two people. I'm like, I'm very nice, but I can be a bit of a dick. So this is the version of myself that I'm putting out into the world here.
I like
Uh,
it.
and it's worked. And now I'm seeing what I can get away with my new job where I have other things to be accountable for.
I like it though. I mean, you know, uh, you mentioned, and I don't know if we were recording when you mentioned this, but you just recently turned 40, and I am, now 1 year on the other side of 45. And I have to say, one of the things that I do love about being in my 40s, and I think it has to do with how much I'm willing to put of myself on the page or pretend to put of myself on the page, is I think when we're younger, and I'm saying we, I don't know if it's like this for everyone. It certainly was for me, but I was for a long time, for years and years, I was just paralyzed by the fear of what other people might think about me or how people might judge me. And that was just such like a suck on my time and on my life and on my enjoyment and of life. And um I'm all for making changes, at the midpoint. And I think it's
Mhm.
very cool what you and your wife have done. And I think I don't know, it's so easy to get to decide inertia is just going to take over my life, and it's so easy to say, well, I'm content and I can just do this for the next few decades. But it's pretty exciting to remember that 40 is still quite young, like actually very, very young. And I
Mhm.
promise when you're 46, you're also going to be like, holy crap, this is still really young. Because there's a certain point where I think our brains just basically stay the same, but it's just
Mhm.
our bodies that are aging, like in this Oscar Wilde kind of way, or Dorian Gray kind of way. And that is like the real curse of uh, being a human, that inside I'm still just like 16, but outside I am definitely not 16 anymore. The elasticity is going fast.
I That's something, especially with hitting that milestone of 40, but now I'm fearing 44 all of a sudden.
You have
Uh,
to.
um, well, we had the opportunity to talk to a doctor who wrote Ageism Unmasked, and that really changed my perspective on older people. And now that years have gone on, and I've had conversations with like one of my best friends. We've been friends since we were 6, and we just are able to have honest conversations with each other a lot of times just through text messages. Um, but it's just like I've had the chat with them of like, do you feel like what like do you feel like an adult right now, and what is that supposed to feel like? Because same
Yeah.
sort of thing where I'm like, occasionally I'll look in the mirror. I'm like, oh, like I am balding up top. Okay,
Yes.
and but mentally, like you're still like you can be more mature, but the yeah, I'm
Yeah.
right there with you.
Completely, like, so before I did this, I had a meeting with a colleague, and I was dressed more professionally because I have to put on my professional clothes, and I
Mhm,
was wearing this necklace that my mother gave me because she stopped buying gifts and she started giving away her jewelry, and her jewelry is absolutely beautiful, and my colleague complimented the necklace, which I quickly took off. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I know, it's just so mature. It's such a mature necklace." And then we both kind of like paused, and I was like, I'm going to be 50 in 40 or in 4 years. And I'm talking about like, it's just a little mature for me, this necklace. Because I still feel like youthful, and I
mhm,
see elegant jewelry and I'm like, well, that's for, when I'm older. When is that? At 80? I'm gonna be like,
yeah,
well, I can finally put this on. Oh, that's the other thing, about having students who are young. Their perception of age, I have to tell you, is just like the funniest thing in the world to me. Like all grandparents have crepe-like skin, doughy skin, and they all the grandparents and everything they write, are just like walking around on walkers. And I'm like, y'all, grandparents are just normal people too. Okay.
Mhm.
There's not something magical that happens. This one student said just last week, she was like, how when people get older and their skin just falls off their face? And I looked at her and I was like, Ava, how old do you think I am? And she looked at me and I could see her like looking to see if my skin was falling off my face. And
Yeah.
I said, skin doesn't fall off the face. And she was like, she just looked at the class and she was like, y'all know what I mean though? And the class was like, you do. And I was like, okay, you all fail. You're all failing. Just kidding. They're all getting A's because they're great
Yeah.
students.
Yeah, I have gotten used to being called sir by teenagers at the drive-through.
When
I'm
did
like,
that happen,
yeah.
right? I know.
My
Like,
wife
when
will
did they stop
reference being called
IDing?
ma'am at the grocery store. I'm
Yes,
like,
yeah.
"Thank
God, yeah.
you."
Take my
Uh,
ID me.
the topic of just you had referenced getting to a certain age and just kind of stopping. Um, I always think my grandfather lived to 95, and he 90 uh, was it 90 95, 96. He was
Yeah.
right. He was almost 96 when he passed away. And I always think of him as like he spent the first like 25 to 30 years of his life like creating and living like he had a Forrest Gump like life of just all of the things that he had done of like his dad died when he was 10 and he ended up becoming a newsie and like won these newspaper sales competitions and went to the World Series of Baseball a couple of times to like took a boat across Lake Erie to Cleveland where it was um, enlisted in the army and served in World War II and just like the number of stories that he had. But then it was like, as I got older, I realized that like his stories kind of stop when he's like 30. So he like collected the most amazing stories for the first 30 years and then spent 65 years retelling them over and over again. And
Ah,
I've like adopted his storytelling ability and like the ridiculous things that I've gotten into. But now that I'm 40 and I'm like, I want to like keep
keep
having
going.
like creating new stories. So like um the weird and I think I had messaged you about it that the day that I was offered the job to work for the Chamber of Commerce was also the day that I somewhat randomly auditioned for and received a role in 12 Angry Men.
That was crazy.
Yeah, so that was 2 months of my life. It went well. Um, I have depression and anxiety, and I'm on medication for that. And I haven't had a panic attack since starting that medication a few years ago. But the last performance that we had, that a lot of my family came to, I was sitting there and I'm like, I'm about to have a panic. Like I delivered the first couple of lines. I delivered my first line, but I'm sitting down, and then I knew that I had a stretch of time before I needed to say something else, and I just like got into my head of like everything that was going on, and realized that I was like breathing heavy, and like the guy who sat next to me was the foreman, and I'm like, should I tell Noah that I'm about to like freak out? And like what would he do? Then he's gonna freak out. So like I was just spiraling in that moment, and like I was able to do some deep breathing exercises and got myself back together. But that was the news story for me.
I mean, that's wild, like, I am I also have anxiety, and I'm really lucky that the depression that I've experienced seems to be situational, but anxiety has been my life. I mean, I honestly wouldn't know what to do without it at this point, but and I've had a couple full-scale panic attacks, one of which, the doctors actually thought my lung was collapsing until they got me back and they did all these tests and they're like, "No, your lung is fine. This is just a panic attack." And that
your
was when I was
your
in
lung
grad
is fine.
school.
Your brain just so not so
Or
much.
it's just there's a whole mess happening up here. But, earlier this week, I had an MRI and I'm claustrophobic, and so I knew going into it, I had taken, my anti-anxiety medication like Xanax to get in there. And right before I went in, they said, okay, so this is going to be 3 hours. And I said, no, it's going to be 45 minutes. And they said, no, it's going to be 3 hours. And so the first hour and a half, I was fine, but it's so similar to what you described. Like
Mhm.
the minute you become aware of there even being an inkling of a problem, for me, it was my hands. My hands started to get hot. And then in my head, I was like, my hands are hot. My hands are hot and I can't move. I'm in here for like who knows how much longer. And then once I realized my hands were hot, then my arms were hot, and then my feet were hot. And then I was just like in a full hive breakout. And you've got a time when you talk to them, because if you time it in the middle of one of the scans, you have to start from scratch. And
Mhm.
I was doing all the breathing exercises. I was counting up to 100. I was counting down. I was making deals, like deals with the devil, deals with God. I was, doing everything I possibly could. And then I made it to the end of that one scan. There was silence and I pushed the button. I was like, get me out of here. And they were able to take the blanket off and I finished it. But man, when the body decides to revolt, it's
Yep.
like that. And there was a story right there, but it's just like, great. They're minor things, they're daily things, but they're also the things that we can continue getting new data, new content, right? For
Yep.
our lives, not just for social media, but just to keep it interesting, to have
Yeah.
something to talk about at the dinner table. And yeah.
I feel bad for my wife and I have different like social anxiety, and or my wife has more social anxiety. I just have the regular kind, and my 9-year-old has all of the things. But I'm glad that I have that experience because there's just evening like he's going to be on some sort of medication at some point in his life. Um, but in the interim, when I like hear him having some sort of like night terror, which I am glad that my anxiety medication has eliminated from my life. But I am able to coach him through different breathing exercises when he is freaking out, which is not something that I had growing up. So I'm
And they
glad.
say that's so important, right, for kids to see as well, to actually have children get to see their parents have emotions and have highs and lows, because it lets them understand that the highs and lows that they're feeling are natural, that there's nothing wrong with it. That sadness, I mean, like, I think a lot of parents, I struggle with this too. If I'm sad, I don't want my stepdaughter to see it, but I have to remind myself it's good for her to see it, because if she doesn't see the grown-ups she loves being sad or being mad, how is
Mhm.
she ever going to think that those feelings are okay to let out? Like literally, if an adult can't do it, why are we asking kids to be able to tell us what's going on with you? But if your adult is not telling you what's going on with them, all
Yeah,
that to say is like your kid's really lucky that he's got somebody who can breathe with him and who's been there.
thanks.
Yeah.
Um, I when I was in one of my darkest places, I had stumbled across Ned Vizzini's book. It's kind of a funny story, and Ned and I ended up writing back and forth. He, this is my continued pursuit of trying to recapture the book that I had that was signed and had a nice note from Ned um, that I lent to a friend who then I think he lent it to a friend who then lost it. And I have had like I've had a friend of a friend go to that person's like childhood home to like look through their bedroom. It's gone. But I would like to put it out into the world that if anyone comes across a copy of It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini and it's written to Bob with a nice little note, please get that book back to me.
Yeah,
Um,
minor reward, like little gift certificate for the bookstore.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah,
But
right?
I had already like lost that book, and then I wrote to Ned, I'm like, hey, I lent it to a friend who lost it. Could I send you another copy to get it signed and have it sent back? And he said, yeah, of course. And then it never got around to it. And I don't know if you know Ned's story, but now I can't do that. So um, I would really
This
like to
it's
find
gonna
that
come
book.
back to you. I bet it comes back to you.
I hope it does.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of anticipated just with how much we've chatted that I only needed to have rough notes and not a series of questions, but I've totally gotten off the rails of what I was going to ask you about. Um, but this chat has been great.
It's been great. No, I'm so glad that we actually I'm thrilled. I'm just so grateful for your continued support. And I think um I think writers everywhere are grateful for your continued support. And I know Henry Holt is like just in awe of you. And um I just thank you and your wife. Both of you are awesome.
Thank you for thanking me.
Well, I
Uh,
can't wait until you've written, like, when you've got, your family, your stuff, and you just have to, like, share it, and whenever you need, you've got fans.
okay. I love the relationship that I have with Henry Holtz, and then somebody that had worked for Carolyn now works for another publisher, and now I'm getting manuscripts from them, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. The uh, the correspondent is one to look out for
Oh,
from
cool.
Crown Publishing,
Okay.
but um, there was have all these questions that I think we had touched on, um, that I want to make sure that if we didn't, um, that we do. But we're also coming up on an hour, and I know you have a life to tend to.
Dinners to cook and people to feed, but listen, whatever you need at any time, you have a friend in Kentucky.
Appreciate that. Um, just because there are people and myself, what is your writing process slash schedule like? Do you
I'm
have
like a
things?
snake that, I've never said that before. That's not a line. But
Okay.
it just made me think of, how like snakes can eat one rabbit and then they're fine for a long time until they
Mhm.
have to eat another rabbit. Um, God, why rabbits? Because rabbits are everywhere in my backyard right now and I love them and that would actually make me really sad about a snake, but I would say it's just nature because that's what I'm supposed to say. That's what my stepdaughter tells me and I'm like, "Yeah, but some nature is uglier than other." More difficult for me to deal with. I love animals. What is my process? My process is when I'm writing, it is the only thing I'm doing. It is all consuming and I'm a pretty selfish person. And then when I'm not writing, I can go weeks and months without it. I'm always reading, I'm always writing things down. And then when an idea hits, usually it starts when I'm running, and I start taking notes when I'm running. And then I start writing down the notes on a legal pad. And then when I get enough legal pads, I start writing it on the computer, because that's where my hands can actually keep up with my brain. But I like to have things tactilely know that I cannot lose them to the cloud or to just like an accidental delete button. So that's
Mhm.
why the legal pads. But I am somebody, a lot of writers like Grisham, right? He's got his thing. It's a book a year and he treats it like a job. And I think that's awesome. I do not treat it like a job. I treat it like the compulsion that it is. And I enjoy my time away from it until I feel like the depression coming on and I feel like a little bit worthless and I feel uninspired and not artistic. And like I start getting angry at myself. And then I know that it's time to start like getting back to like words and language and the privacy of me and a story. But I think it's really good. I hope that that's good for people to hear because I do think there are a lot of these very idealized notions of the writer who gets up and like, he's up at 4 a.m. and he's writing and for 8 hours straight. And that is awesome. I admire that. But that is just not what I can do. And especially as a teacher, I have my summers free. And so you have to train yourself to take advantage of those summers. And I really take my job seriously and I take teaching seriously. So I want to give my fall and my spring to my students. But I do always try to get a couple either essays or short stories going when I'm teaching. I like to respond to the prompts that I've given my students, and I have a couple things that have been published that I've written that were kind of, I didn't think they'd ever become anything, but There are many ways to be a writer, but if you're gonna write, you're gonna write, and it doesn't have to be it can be regimented, and that's awesome, but it can also just be like a snake eating a rabbit. Why what did that rabbit do in my mind to get eaten by a snake? I don't know. What about
um, just a couple other questions. You had a playlist for "Listen to Me," which I'm an Apple Music person, where most people are Spotify. So I added those songs to a playlist and listened to it and really enjoyed it. Um, do you listen to music while you're writing, or is it more just an inspiration when you're crafting a story?
Yeah, no, I don't listen to music when I write. I can listen to white noise. A fan is really useful. I have definitely like my debut, I wrote with basically basketball on the entire time because my ex-husband was watching the NBA playoffs when I was and just like watching the NBA and then the playoffs. But I can tune that out. That's basically like white noise to me.
Mm,
Um, uh, but no, music I listen to while I cook. It's great. Like, but I love lyrics so much and I love music so much that if I'm listening to it, that's where my brain is. So I think I could probably get on like I could probably write to some cocktail jazz, something like that. But
mhm.
if somebody starts singing, my brain is paying attention to that, and then it's paying attention to a million other things instead of, like, focused.
That brought back a memory of college when I would be studying and I got into listening to jazz when I was studying, and I haven't thought about that in quite some time, but
It's funny.
it was just a little flashback there. And what are you reading now, and who are some of your favorite authors?
Well, gosh, I'm reading quite a few different things. Doris Lessing, absolutely adored Doris Lessing. Deborah Levy, who I mentioned earlier. Margaret Atwood. Just like three favorites right off the top of my head. Anne Beattie, obviously, I talk a lot about her and write a lot about her. Um, but what I'm reading right now, Honor Jones, who's an editor at The Atlantic, has a debut novel coming out called Sleep that
Okay.
is so good. I think it's gonna win all sorts of awards. And then Lynn Steger Strong has a book coming out maybe this month,
Mm.
called Float Test. It takes place in Florida. It's a family drama. It's so good that what she's doing with the narrative is quite sly, very tricky, very complicated. And then a former student of mine has her debut memoir coming out called This Is Your Mother, and her name is Erica Simpson. And this book is going to be huge. It is so good. It's so poignant, so funny. Uh, this is your mother, Erica Simpson, so just like spot on. I think you're going to be seeing a lot of that book too. So
I'm gonna have to look that one up.
mhm, yeah.
Um, I um, took a creative writing class in college just on a whim and ended up developing a good relationship. I'm still friends with the professor, and then one of his students after that was Tommy Orange.
Oh wow.
Um,
Yeah,
he
they're there.
did,
Yeah.
he now teaches at a Native American college, and Tommy Orange did his MFA through there. And I'm like, oh, I should have paid attention to your class, but I should have paid it even more attention, taking more of your
He's a
classes.
great writer. He's great. Yeah, exactly.
um, I just wanted to get one last thing of more of a thank you, but also the appreciation that I had. It's not really a spoiler, but it does come right at the end of the book of the idea of being characters in other people's lives. And I have developed an appreciation that we are characters in each other's lives. It's been very nice getting to know you through your books and also giving you live updates as I read them.
I love that. I love
still
that.
have a couple more to do.
Incredibly flattering, and don't ever think that any writer doesn't love that attention. It's like it couldn't that was just absolutely wonderful. But thank you. I mean, I will say, they say that there are epiphany stories and missed epiphany stories, and there is an epiphany in this book. And it's on the one hand, everything that leads up to the epiphany isn't real. But the epiphany that the narrator has, which is what you just said, is a real epiphany for me. Writing the book did help me process not being in control of my story, which is something that you cannot always be in control of. And so by the time I got there, I really meant to get there. It was a surprise to me, and when I landed on it, it was like, yes, this is true. Like in music, this is the one. Like I have found the final beat, and it's real and it's authentic, even though this is a work of fiction. The epiphany is absolutely felt. So for you to feel it too is really awesome.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you again for directing your pre-orders to our website. That
Of
has
course.
been
Are you kidding?
fantastic. If you haven't placed a pre-order yet, if you love it, let it kill you. July
15th.
15th. I was
Yep.
going to say 16th. Close enough.
It's a Tuesday. Always
All
a
right.
Tuesday, right?
Oh, yeah. We're always closed on Tuesdays, so it'll be
Wednesday.
available to pick up on the 16th.
There we go. You were right.
We'll have it shipped out before then. But yeah, thanks for taking the time. I know that you were trying to push for a visit to Lakewood.
I would love it. I want to make it happen.
If that works with your schedule, you're
Okay. I'm still
more than
working on that. Don't worry. That
Right.
has not gone anywhere. I really want to do it.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Thank you, sir. Have a great time at your other job, and hi to your wife.
All right, thank you. Hi
Yes.
to the
Bald man.
boyfriend.
Yeah, bald boyfriend. Cool.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye, Bob.
Bye.